our exploration of mortality continues this week with the transatlantic slave trade, because as I consider my own mortality, I have to consider the mortality of those whose blood flows in my veins now. The Africans who gave my skin its hue, the enslavers who gave my people their last names, and all of the complex and complicated tales that are bound up in that. The Reverend Dr. Betancourt reminds us that the bones have meaning, that our ancestors once had bodies too. And it's hard sometimes to find ourselves in these narratives of the ancestors, because sometimes we might be the enslaved in that narrative, and in our bodies, our DNA is a story of collective liberation that we still hold now. If we are the enslaver, there might be guilt or shame tied up with that. And if we have Hapa or mixed race and ethnic identities, it all gets a little bit twisted, don't it? When we gather the bones, we remember that our ancestors were once people too. And someday we will also be the ancestors. These bodies, having served their purposes, return to the earth as bones that hopefully, we might be fortunate enough to be admonished by our own descendants one day. Now, when we gather the bones, this is imagery that comes to the Reverend Dr. Betancourt from Afro-Caribbean Espiritismo practices. But it is an image, it is a concept that goes deep back in our theological history. Most directly for us, it comes to us through the Jewish tradition. There's a powerful narrative in Hebrew Bible, the Bible of the Jewish people, where prophet Ezekiel, who was a little bit quirky, but we're going to deal with this narrative for right now, finds himself one day in front of a valley of dry bones. If you've ever done scouting or maybe just gone on a camping trip and sang the song, "Dem Bones Gonna Rise Again," the song's about this narrative. Now, because the song tells you about Adam and Eve, you don't necessarily put two and two together, but it's about Ezekiel, I promise. One day, Prophet Ezekiel finds himself way out in the desert looking over bones. The casualties of the Jewish people from multiple wars and times of conquest and subjugation. And the divine speaks to Ezekiel and commands him to prophesy, to speak to these bones and tell them that your bodies will be made whole again and will know freedom and liberation again. In the religion of the Jewish people, it's important to remember that we're always trying to work back to a place of restoration of all creation, a time of sustainable peace and compassion. And for the Jewish people, that restoration flows right through them as the chosen people of the divine. First, they must restore their own selves, their integrity and their humanity. And just like that, creation and restoration will flow outward to all of us. This reminds us of our own connection to the land, because as I said, we'll all become bones too. And maybe someday our descendants will speak to us, asking for the guidance and wisdom. We know this. We know this because we say it every Sunday in our land acknowledgement. When we express that we honor our shared responsibility to this land and these waters, that we commit to learning from Hawaiian wisdom, and we strive to repair and deepen our relationships as neighbors and friends. We're talking to ourselves across history, across generations. We are the neighbors and friends we're trying to work together with to make sure that we commit to these lands, to these waters, to these people, to these folks who are still impacted by occupation. As we're on the eve of Indigenous Peoples Day, we cannot take too seriously that we were on the land of occupied people. Our military is an occupying force that keeps this land in the control of people thousands of miles away. And there is work of generations for us to do to restore ourselves and these people to this land. And so that calls us to do ancestor work, to speak to our ancestors in the past from our vantage of the future. Now, here's the challenge, or maybe I like to use the word complication in doing ancestor work. A lot of us don't actually know who our ancestors are. I don't know anything about my family before 1854 in North Carolina. Black folk been around a lot longer than that. And I imagine there are some of you who can trace your family trees way further back than that. And so when we do ancestor work, sometimes the issues are we don't even know to whom to address, whom we are addressing. Another issue can be we don't actually know what we'd say to our ancestors if we had the moment to address them. What do you say to potentially an enslaver or a colonizer or someone who benefited from conquest deep back in your history? What do you say to that person back in the past, and how would we say it? How would we say it in a way that we're willing to be held accountable for someday when our own descendants tell us, you know what? That had a really negative impact for us. We wish you would have behaved differently. But we also know that there are complications in the failure to do the ancestor work, in the failure to reach back across time and address the impacts that our ancestors have had, both positive and negative, on us. The consequences for not doing the work are as if we have enslaver or colonizer or occupier in our past, or maybe we're the occupier now. We hold that in our bodies, and it can create deep emotional and psychological distress that make it hard for us to use the time that we have right now to do what we can do instead of lament what our ancestors failed to do. We can hold that in our bodies in a way that can get us all twisted up and knotted. And we can forget that we are the bodies of one human community that has all the gifts and skills that we need in order to do the work we need to do in the time, the very limited time we have been given. And most importantly, when we fail to do the work, we might not connect back to that deeply embodied sense of collective liberation that is the birthright of every one of you here and online. There are negative consequences when we don't realize that we are the ones that we have been waiting for. We are enough and we can get the job done. For some of y'all, you might need to connect with other white anti-racist exemplars. Some of our ancestors, you know what? They don't want to be admonished and they're hard-headed. All right? They're going to fight you tooth and nail. Who among us hasn't sometimes become defensive when we feel like we're under siege, when we're under attack because someone brought up our own embodied shame that we could have done better? And not only that, we actually knew better, so we shouldn't have done that. It's okay. If that's the case for you, you might have to put those ancestors in the timeout corner until they're ready to listen. They might not ever be. For those of us who are the descendants of people who were colonized, occupied, or maybe even enslaved, we already have in our bodies all of the narratives and stories that we need of collective liberation, of sinking ships in order to get free, or valuing our own lives so much that our spirits could not be broken, even under the conditions of our new context in the Americas. So some of y'all might need to speak to your other white anti-racist exemplars like Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spaniard from the 1400s and 1500s who protested against Spanish subjugation and colonialism. In that time, he pointed out that the peoples that we were oppressing, that the peoples the Spaniards were oppressing, were fully human and had civilizations of their own. That exists in white anti-racist history. You might have to reach back and talk to John Brown, who we executed because he tried to incite a riot among enslaved Africans in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. He was so successful that they wrote a song about his body moldering in the ground as something to lift us up, and they changed the words to Glory, Glory, Hallelujah. I hope you all live a life so transgressive that the state changes the words to a song about you because it might lead to rebellion. We might have to reach back to the sisters, Sarah and Angelina Grimke, who grew up in wealthy slave-owning South Carolina families and were horrified by the brutality that they witnessed. In the 17 and 1800s, they became popular abolitionist speakers, and they also fought for women's rights. If your ancestors won't listen, you might have to talk to other ancestors so that you can learn what they have to teach, so that you can teach them strategies that they did not know. And most importantly, we can gain the humility to one day be admonished by our own descendants. And that's the thing about mortality. In the limited time that we have a moral imperative. We have a spiritual imperative to learn how to be good ancestors. Being good ancestors requires us to both reach back into the past to speak to those who came before us, learn what they have to teach and tell them what they did not do so well as doing the work of repair that we can in the time that we have. We know that even the most hard-headed ancestors that led to negative impacts to us right now in the future, with generations and generations of work, we can make things a lot better. Getting free together is multi-generational work, and we're only one part of that tale. We have to do this work because, as former executive director of Southerners on the Ground, Mary Hooks points out in the mandate for Black America, it is the mandate in our time to earn the respect of future generations. And we cannot do that unless we work together. Here in our context, the ways we do that are abundant. We know that all kupuna, all elders are kupuna of the Aina, of this land. And we know that all mo'opuna, all descendants are mo'opuna of this Aina. And we know together, we are all kapo'e, we are the people of this Aina. And it is our kuleana, it is our moral imperative to figure out how to make it all work. All we can do is use the time we have right now. Go ahead. To figure out how to do the work we can do. That's all we've ever been asked. We'll make mistakes. Oh, golly gosh, will we make mistakes? And sometimes it will be hard, but it is okay. How we respond to the mistakes that we make is far more important than which mistakes we made. Given enough time, we can repair or transform from some of them. There is no way forward without apology and reparation. But how we respond is more important than the fact that we made a mistake in the first place. And so we're called, as the Reverend Dr. Betancourt reminds us, to gather the bones. We have to be careful what we ask for in the process of speaking to our ancestors, to speaking from our grand elders from this point in the future, because we might ask for the wrong thing, Monkey found out, right? We might ask for the wrong thing and make the wrong learnings. But if we talk to them, if we learn from them, if we teach them, and sometimes choose new ancestors to benefit from, we can get one more day forward. We can get ever so incrementally closer to restoration of a peaceful and sustainable world. We can take one more step to that beautiful future we are creating right now to earn the respect of our descendants. And this, beloveds, this is our work. And the time we have, it's all we are called to do. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be.